I'm Paula Barros.
And I'm Melanie Bartley.
And this is Sacred Scandal.
I believe Mikhailo was sexually abused by the priest. If he says that it's happened, it happened.
That never seemed like an option to me.
It's hard to accept, and I believe it now. I mean, what Mikhailo did was so awful. Like, there had to have been something to make that come out of him.
Obviously, again, we don't know what happened, but we never saw anything. We never felt anything.
Do I think it's a possibility? Absolutely. I totally think it's possible. Do I know for sure if that happened? No, and I will never know.
The sexual accusations of his abuse, for one thing, we never heard anything. Never. It never happened.
The initial evidence around the campus of Holy Cross painted a picture of premeditated murder, and certain things clearly stood out.
The knife used in the murder was part of a matching set from the house at Barry University. Mike would need to bring that with him days before the murder. There were also the gloves and unused roll of duct tape he showed police when they returned to the scene. And then there were those odd, bloody footprints across campus. They looked like a shapeless smudge because Mike only wore socks that night, maybe as a way to keep his steps from being heard.
This evidence, plus Mike's own admission to the murder of Sister Michelle Lewis, meant his life was now destined for one of two paths: life in prison or death row.
But the sexual abuse he alleged was happening to him at Holy Cross could give his court-appointed public defense team another route to take to trial. If they could prove that Mike was sexually abused and that it had truly put him in an uncontrolled, murderous rage, they would be able to put together an insanity defense. That defense would argue that Mike committed his crime because the alleged abuse caused him to act irrationally and lose his ability to determine right from wrong. To do that, the defense would need to corroborate Mike's claims and try to prove that he was telling the truth.
So now, both sides would start compiling evidence to complete their sides of the story.
The defense would start building their case at the source of those allegations, Mikhailo Koval.
When Mikhailo made allegations of sexual abuse, I realized it was rather critical to be very careful about revealing these allegations and incorporating them as part of our defense if I didn't check them out.
This is Edith Georgie, who spent 35 years as an attorney with the Miami-Dade Public Defender's Office. Edith would lead Mike's defense team.
We had Mikhailo polygraphed by an independent person who's highly acclaimed, well-respected. He passed. And one of the first things I did was bring down an expert that we've known for years from outside of the state who's a very highly acclaimed person, and he has tremendous experience with victims of violence. And I said, do whatever you need to work with Mr. Koval and give me a report as to whether you think the allegations are valid or not, because I don't want to put them out there in any way, shape, or form if I don't believe them. And he was tested for about 4 or 5 days, and this expert reported to me that he absolutely believed what Mikhailo was saying, the manner in which he expressed it, the detail in which he reported it. And in fact, this expert was aghast at how sophisticated and horrific these so-called fathers were.
But even the findings of these experts would not be enough for the defense to fully prove that Mike was telling the truth about his abuse. To get that information, both the prosecution and Mike's lawyers would need to speak with the monks and priests of Holy Cross. But that would not be easy.
There was an edict sent out from Father Abbott and his council from the beginning that no one was to speak with anyone from the outside, meaning lawyers, investigators, police, without an attorney present. Generally, in a case like this, where our client has friends and associates in the community, we will immediately send out an investigator to go to the location of those people, and often people will speak to us and want to speak to us voluntarily. In this case, they were forbidden to do so by Father Abbott.
At this point, Holy Cross's insurance company stepped in as well. Church Mutual Insurance, which covers religious organizations and handles liability cases for them, provided lawyers for the monastic candidates and priests of Holy Cross.
Each monastic candidate, as I recall, was given his own lawyer. So we had about 6 lawyers. I think there were 4 monastic candidates and Father Abbott and Father Damien, all funded by the insurance company, I believe, that funds any claims against the school.
And all of these layers of lawyers made it difficult for Edith's team to get any corroborating information from inside the school.
I'd say that I have never seen in my years doing this kind of work any group who have been less cooperative with the police. And to have a school not allow police in, to have a school monitor every single move that was made, the warnings that Father Abbott gave, he did not allow the monastic candidates to speak or anyone to speak voluntarily. Everything had to be pursuant to a subpoena. But he warned them in a very dramatic tone that they should not speak about anything personal if they were asked anything personal. And from the beginning, it was clear that Father Abbott was concerned about what might be coming out, which I found quite curious. Now, what would he be worried about?
But there was something to worry about. Soon after Mike made the allegations of sexual assault against Father Wendt and Father Damien, a sex crime case was opened. And Gail Levine, the lead prosecutor in the murder case, would also play a role here and come up against those same challenges as the defense.
Immediately upon Mikhailo Kofel giving a statement to police that he had been sexually abused at the Holy Cross Academy, as law enforcement, we became extremely concerned about the other children that were there. There were 4 other people under the age of 18 that were residing there. There was 1 person over the age of 18. We wanted to make sure that no one else was being hurt. What we immediately encountered was resistance from getting any contact with the monastic candidates from the Ukraine. So we tried very hard, and I assembled a team to be available on one day during one afternoon when all 4 of us could begin by interviewing those 4 Ukrainian nationals. Immediately, we were given notice that a legal team had been assembled, and none of those students would come to the state attorney's office without subpoenas and without the presence of their lawyers. What we thought was so shocking was really within 36 hours, a legal team had been assembled, and police couldn't even go out and gather the witnesses or the possible victims up, and get information about them and what was going on. We were prohibited from doing that, and we were prohibited for several days, and that made us more concerned, very concerned, that they were going to be told what to say and what to do.
When the legal teams finally did get subpoenas to speak with the monastic candidates, they were surprised by the demeanor of the boys.
When we did get a chance to meet those children, it was to us shocking what we saw. They were clearly well-groomed. They appeared thin, but not malnourished, pale as if they hadn't seen the Florida sun at all. And they were rigidly dressed. White shirts, black pants, black shoes. They certainly didn't come across as teenage boys. They came across as small robots. They spoke beautifully and clearly, but with a specific cadence in their voice. When you ask them, do you know the difference between good touching and bad touching? They would say, yes. Did anybody touch you in a bad place? No. How do you like living at the monastery? Very good. Everything's fine. So it was a matter of, for lack of a better word, pulling teeth. We got nothing out of them.
And the lawyers from Church Mutual Insurance complicated things for the teams investigating Mike's claims of sexual abuse. Here's Gail Levine again.
They're a huge insurance company. They provide the best representation. And they tangled a web that was very hard for us to untangle. Every kid had an excellent lawyer. Now, I don't know what was done before the kid got to me, but by the time the kid got to me, the kid was schooled in what to say. Nothing happened to me. So that's why I went to Ukraine. I got permission from the State Department to go to Ukraine, where these people were not represented by anybody.
This decision to go to Ukraine to speak with former monastic candidates and the families of the boys in Miami was a choice both the defense and prosecution would make in the months after the murder. But what they didn't know was that Church Mutual Insurance was also eager for answers, and they were one step ahead on the way to Ukraine. That's coming up after a break. Welcome back to Sacred Scandal. In the weeks after Mihailo Kofel accused the priests at Holy Cross of sexual abuse, both his defense team and the prosecution started to look for any evidence of these claims. But the priests and monastic candidates were shielded by lawyers hired by the school's insurance company. With these obstacles preventing them from getting any clear answers, both teams decided that they would travel to Ukraine to talk to the monastic candidates who left and the families of those that were still in Miami.
But before they could get there, a private investigator hired by Church Mutual Insurance would beat them to it.
My name is Michael Zubas. I am recognized worldwide as a premise liability, negligent security, crime prevention, security, and police law enforcement agency policies and procedures expert.
Zuvas was actually called onto the scene from the moment the murder happened. He was a retired police chief from Miami Shores and knew many of the officers already on the scene. He remained a part of the case as the murder evolved into the investigation of sexual abuse claims. Unlike the teams of Gail Levine and Edith Georgie, Zuvas was granted unrestricted access to interview the monastic candidates of Holy Cross. And like sex abuse cases at other churches, he would try to get to the bottom of their allegations.
Is there anything you look for, any signs, any demeanor or any hints that the person that is being accused would actually be guilty?
Well, I had a case and the choir director was sodomizing young men that were in the choir. He groomed them and then he was having sex with 3 or 4 of them. And some allegation came out from some parent, and then I interviewed these individuals, and they broke down and confessed to me after a period of time that this stuff was going on. And
did they deny it at first, those boys?
Yeah, because it's an embarrassing thing,
So is there a chance that these monastic candidates may have denied it at first if they weren't really being pressed, or you didn't have enough time to keep going asking them?
I think we had plenty of time. Look, no's no. You can get sworn statements and interviewing them. I mean, you look them right in the eye, look them right in the face. I never detected any any one of them lying. I never detected that. As a trained interrogator, there's all kinds of signs.
Okay, I see.
And these boys, not one of them ever portrayed that they were being disingenuous. I just never got that.
Right.
At all. Maybe somebody else had different, thoughts, but me, I didn't.
After speaking to the monastic candidates at Holy Cross, Zuvas started to come to his own conclusions about the allegations against Father Wendt and Father Damien.
As we were progressing along with our investigation, nothing was learned there that was in any way, shape, or form could have involved the two priests. The accusation made by Kofel, there was no evidence that was discovered that in any way, shape, or form implicated them in those allegations.
But to be sure that those boys weren't leaving anything unsaid, the insurance company decided that Zuvas still needed to dig deeper for the truth.
There were, as I recall, 4 or 5 monk candidates there at Holy Cross from the Ukraine. I guess whomever decided that it would probably be a good idea for me to go to the Ukraine and to locate the parents of all 5 of these monks and interview them to see whether or not they had ever received letters from their boys or phone calls from their boys. And also there were a couple of them that actually went back to the Ukraine for vacation. And while they were there, did they express any concern to throw any validity to what Kofel was saying? Was there sexual abuse on the part of Abbott and Damien? And so that's what I did.
Zuvas says Father Wendt was helpful in getting things set up for him in Ukraine. The priest arranged for the private investigator to work with the same translator he used when traveling there. In 2001, Zuvas would need a visa to enter the country. He told us that he also used the contact of Father Wendt in New Jersey to expedite that process.
So no, Father Abbott was very helpful and very thrilled that I was going over there to seek out the truth.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that that might be considered a conflict of interest? Thinking that the person who is accused of the allegations you're investigating is helping you, secure an interpreter and helping you with your travel and all of that?
No, I wouldn't consider it a conflict of interest or even unethical. I mean, he didn't take part in any of the interviews. He had not spoken to those parents that I detected prior to me getting there. They were the main focus. He didn't know who the driver was that was hired. He didn't know the attorney, I don't think. No, I did not view that as a conflict of interest at all.
Okay.
I viewed it as a very helpful thing because I was going to a place in the world where you don't just travel to and everything it's like going to New York City.
After getting his visa, he flew from Miami to Paris and then on to Budapest.
In Hungary, a driver from Ukraine would meet up with him, and they'd cross the border into Transcarpathia the following day.
Off I went to a town called Uzhgorod. Checked into the big hotel that's in that town, built by the Russians many, many, many years ago. Very stark, no hot water, no blankets on the bed. It was a rough 5 nights I spent there.
In Uzhgorod, Zuvas and his driver would then meet up with the translator and a local lawyer who would certify the statements he got from the families.
We set out for the next 5 days, traveling all over the Ukraine, tracking families down and getting sworn statements from them. Here's another one here. It's Andrea Herstak. That's one of the sworn ones. The other sworn one is Ivanich Semenyuk.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like, even if they sound repetitive and they all say sort of the same thing, I'd like to hear different snippets.
Well, here it is. Ilya Herstak stayed in the Holy Cross monastery in Miami, Florida, with the aim to become a monk of the above monastery within November 8, 1999, till August 20, 2000. During the above period, no pressure, either physical or moral, was displayed towards me. But I decided to leave my study there. The reason of it is my persuasion that I can never be a monk, as far as I have no real vocation to go into church. Regarding Sister Michelle, I can say that she was very polite to all of us and deserves only respect for her honorable job. Neither Father Gregory nor Father Went never did me something that was wrong from the moral or physical point of view. They never told me things that made me feel uncomfortable. I never saw a witness of moral or physical abusing displayed by Father Gregory or Father Damien towards candidates of the monastery. The other one, this is Ivanovich Semenyuk, lived at the monastery center village of Konsovo, Uzhgorod district, Zakarpattia region, by my own wish from 2000, July 31, as I am willing to be a clergyman. During my studies at the center, I have got acquainted with Gregory Went. He made the impression of a very good and respectable man. He manifested kindness and understanding towards me. He never humiliated me with words or deeds. There was no any sexual abuse towards me from his side. What concerns Father Damien, I have heard about him but do not know him personally. The present statement is written by myself personally without any influence of a third person's. And then the others are in Russian.
Like this statement from Ilya Herzog and the other from the boy who was still in the monastic training center, all of the former candidates and parents in Ukraine were telling Zuvis the same thing. They never witnessed, experienced, or heard of any sexual abuse at Holy Cross.
In interviewing the families of these monastic candidates, were the parents afraid or alarmed at what had happened?
They didn't express that. They were extremely thrilled and happy. They were thrilled that their sons had this opportunity to leave this desperate, horrible existence in the Ukraine. And when I say desperate, horrible, it's pretty rough there in the Ukraine, particularly in these villages where I visited. I actually saw a 70-year-old woman pulling a plow. Two males were pulling the plow, and she was guiding the plow. And I asked where the tractor was. They said the tractor, they used the parts to make bullets, the Russians. And I said, where's the mule? And she said, we ate it. So that's the conditions that they live in there. And so these parents, they were thrilled that their boys had this opportunity to come to the United States of America, get an education, and become priests someday. That's like a dream come true for some of these families.
The only place where Zuva said he didn't feel the same excitement was in the village of Vergovina Bistra. By now, the Kofels, Mike's parents, were already aware that their son was in prison for killing Sister Michelle.
And the mother was, she was very volatile. At first, she was spewing spit and yelling at me about her son being in jail, etc., etc. She was very angry. And then during the interview, she actually turned around and went after her husband, Kofel's father. And she started to accuse him of his abuse to Kofel when he was growing up.
In front of you?
Yes, in front of all of us, yes. That he was harsh and that he beat the kid and did things like that that caused the boy to grow up. And maybe she was insinuating is why he did what he did.
Did she mention anything about sexual abuse at all?
I don't recall whether she actually narrowed it down to sexual abuse, and I don't think that she did. I believe she just spoke of just abuse that the father born on that child when he was growing up. He was a cocky little guy who actually was very cocky and nasty to me. Alcohol was involved there, because I remember him drinking that day when we were there.
Did they know you were coming? Were they expecting you?
No, they were not, actually. Some of these homes were very difficult to locate. I mean, when we finally located it, it took us almost a half a day to find this house. And when we knocked on the door, they had no earthly idea who we were, but certainly it was explained to them, and they know their son's in jail in America. So it wasn't like we were from some outer space, Mars or something. We had those credentials, so they did welcome us into the house because she kept screaming that she wanted us to help her son get out of prison and come home. That was her whole purpose of even talking to us.
After sending off a lawyer to have the sworn statements notarized in Kiev, Zuvas returned to the United States with no new evidence of sexual abuse at Holy Cross.
Weeks later, by the time Edith Georgi and her defense team arrived in Ukraine, the tone around her client's childhood home changed.
After Mikhailo's arrest, his father apparently stopped drinking and reformed himself. So when we were there, he was in good shape, and the parents were as cooperative as they could be. They felt like they'd been hoodwinked. Well, yeah, both of his parents told me. At the beginning, Abbott promised regular communication. They'd see him back frequently. And as it turned out, his mail was monitored. Phone calls were severely limited. He could only return to the Ukraine when he had to because of his passport or visa issues. And when he did come back, he was always accompanied by Abbott or Damien, who wouldn't let him out of their sight, under their control completely. The parents realized by the first time he came back that this was not what they'd bargained for. But he wasn't free to speak. They didn't know any better. Things were told to them that he was doing fine. The last time he visited, the parents and the local priest they all noticed a real change in him, a real quietness, a real depression in him. And they tried to talk to him in their own way and see if maybe he wouldn't go back. But he didn't have the strength. He was under their control, almost hypnotically.
Both Edith's and the insurance company's investigator were in Ukraine looking for any shred of evidence about sexual abuse. And their team got a lot of the same answers. Though the defense was delayed in their travel, they were, however, able to spend more time with Mikhailo, which gave them a different set of tools for investigating the claims of abuse. They could use what Mike told them about his experience and ask the former monastic candidates more specific questions about things they may have noticed at the monastery. Edith believed that she'd found something when she spoke to Ilya Herzog, who we heard from on our last few episodes. He was no longer a monk and living back in Ukraine.
We investigated as much as we could the data that Mikhailo was giving us to see if it checked with what the other monk candidates would say, and it did. Ilya, we spent some time with, and Ilya reported the same circumstances that Mikhailo had described to us that would allow the opportunity to be there. That only Mikhailo was allowed into Damien's room privately, and that Mikhailo was called in there frequently by Damien, and that Mikhailo was heard to go downstairs late at night after the other candidates were supposed to be in their rooms. The dorm was run very military style. You could only be in your rooms at a certain time, but once you're in your room, you have to stay in your room until you have permission to come out. So everybody was kind of listening to see if people obeyed those rules. No one, of course, could ever say, I saw it happen, because there were, as usual, no witnesses. But everything checked out. the whole picture checked out.
It wasn't much, but it was something Edith could take back to Miami to try to build her defense.
But even now, Mike was still up against the death penalty. And not long after Edith and her team were gone, the third set of investigators arrived in Transcarpathia.
This time, it was Assistant State Attorney Gail Levine and Detective Larry Bellew who originally heard Mihailo's confession.
Why did it seem important for your team to go to Ukraine?
Well, he made an allegation, and it started way back when, and that would have something to do with his sentencing over here, I would imagine. I traveled to the Ukraine, where his parents were, and we introduced ourselves. They were very nice in the beginning. We talked to them, and the father said that, he would sleep in the bed with us sometime. I said, okay, well, did you do anything to him? And he, absolutely not, because we had to go through an interpreter.
What would you say your biggest takeaways were, or did you find out anything that you didn't know in the Ukraine?
No, not really. I assumed once we approached him about, were you molesting your child? All we got was he slept in our bed sometimes. Nothing ever happened. And that's just the way it is. So I assumed they were going to deny, and there's nothing I could have attacked them with. And that was pretty much the end of the story as far as the Ukraine.
Both sides traveled halfway across the world without any explosive statements or concrete evidence that the sex abuse allegations were true. But like everything else in this story, the biggest revelations were in the same place they always were, inside the monastery at Holy Cross. Stay with us. We'll be back after a break. Welcome back to Sacred Scandal. I'm Paula Barrows.
And I'm Melanie Bartley.
After returning from Ukraine without a smoking gun, Edith Georgi's defense team needed to find something in Miami that would strengthen her insanity defense. To do that, her team had to solidify the sexual abuse allegations against the priests of Holy Cross.
But with legal proceedings of capital cases usually taking years before going to trial, both sides were worried that they were up against the clock. They were concerned that once the monastic candidates' visas expired, they would return to Ukraine and be unable to appear as witnesses during a trial.
So, a judge gave permission to subpoena the monastic candidates and record videos of their testimony for future use.
So we already had part of the trial, in fact, preserved. The monk candidates had what's called perpetuated testimony. So we actually preserved their testimony to be used in the future.
For the defense, these testimonies were led by Edith and Ray Tassif, her co-counsel on the case. And these interviews would help inch the defense towards getting the information they were looking for.
They had been programmed to some degree, some more than others. And so, they all had little bits and pieces of information that added to the credibility of the story that Mikhailo had told and of the unique context or environment that they were in terms of isolation and thought control and behavioral control.
What were those bits and pieces that you remember helping his case in that sense?
Well, I remember details about when they traveled and Petros staying in the room with Wendt. I thought that was highly unusual.
The traveling Ray mentioned is something Mike told us about as well. Over the years, the priests would take the monastic candidates on trips. They went to Disney World, North Carolina, Naples, and Sanibel Island.
Now, in Sanibel, at the Holiday Inn, you stayed in a room with one of the other monastic candidates, correct?
I think so, but I'm not 100% search.
This is Vasil Kopich being asked about those trips.
That on the trip to Sanibel, Father Abbott stayed in a room and slept in the same room with Petro, correct?
Yeah.
And you know on the trip to Sanibel that Father Damien stayed with and slept in the same room with Mikhailo, correct?
Correct.
And you stayed in a room with one of the other monastic candidates, correct?
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Now, to the trip to North Carolina, you went again as a group, correct?
Correct.
And in North Carolina, you stayed in cabins, correct?
Yeah, in the cabin.
In cabins. It was each individual little cabin where people stayed, correct?
We stayed in one cabin. All of us, whole group in one house, in one cabin.
Okay. Well, we know that Father Damien, again, slept in the same room with whom?
It's 3 bedrooms and 1 cabin. So Father Abbott and Petro in one room, Father Damien and Misha in another, and I and Sasha in the third room.
So, the trip to North Carolina, you stayed in a cabin, there were 3 bedrooms, correct?
Yeah.
Father Damien and Mikhailo stayed in a bedroom together and
Yes.
slept in the same room, correct?
Yes, correct.
Father Abbott stayed in the same room and slept in the same room as Petro, correct?
Correct.
And you stayed in a bedroom with one of the other monastic candidates,
Yeah.
correct?
Correct.
And isn't it a fact in those bedrooms, in that cabin in North Carolina, in each bedroom there was only 1 bed?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so in North Carolina, Father Abbott and Petro slept in the same bed, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
And in North Carolina, Father Damien and Mikhailo slept in the same bed, correct?
Yes.
Ray and Edith also asked the monastic candidates if they heard someone walking around their house at night after curfew. They remembered Mihailo told them he would be summoned to Father Damien's room at that time.
Now, as we've seen the pictures, you and 3 other candidates slept in the bedroom with the bunk beds, right?
What?
You slept in the bedroom with the 4 beds?
Yes.
Okay. And that is very near the hallway where the stairway is.
Yes.
So it's a round stairway.
Yes.
Okay. And everyone had lights out at 10, right?
Yes.
Go to sleep, you're not supposed to get up. Right?
You can get up to go to the bathroom or that.
You can get up to go to the bathroom. You don't have to ask for permission for that, right?
No.
But to go downstairs after 10 o'clock, you need to have permission from Father Abbott.
Yeah, case of study.
Okay, and if you want to get that permission, you ask in advance if it's okay for you to go downstairs after 10 o'clock, right?
Yes.
So, as of 10 o'clock, everyone should be in their beds. You 4 in the room with the 4 beds, and Mikhailo in his room, a single room, and Petro, if he's sleeping there, in his room, right?
Yes.
Now, many times during the night, you heard footsteps going up and down that stairway, didn't you?
Yes.
And you never bothered to find out who that was or what was happening, did you?
No.
You knew it was either Mikhailo or Petro, right?
Yes.
Because none of your 4 people got up and went downstairs.
I mean 3.
3, you and the others. None of you guys were getting up, so it had to be Mikhailo or Petro, right?
Yes.
And by the way, Petro's room had a separate entrance through another stairway, didn't it?
Yes.
So, hearing these footsteps going up and down the stairs, and I'm talking about before March, before this horrible thing happened in March, you heard those footsteps many times.
Yes.
But you never found out why.
No.
Most of these testimonies took place about 8 months after the murder at Holy Cross. By then, the biggest silence of all was from Father Wendt and Father Damien.
Interestingly, Damien and Abbott moved off the campus and moved to another location as soon as this whole case broke, because they didn't want to appear to be living with the young candidates anymore. They had to separate themselves.
Aside from a few press releases sent out by a PR firm and letters to Holy Cross parents, the priest said little publicly about the murder or the allegations against them. Almost a year and a half after Mike was arrested, Gail and Edith were finally able to depose the priests. Father Wendt and Father Damien each appeared separately with their lawyer present.
But on the advice of those lawyers, both priests refused to answer almost every single question they were asked. They resisted and pleaded the Fifth Amendment for hours.
How did you get in touch with the boys in Ukraine? Fifth Amendment. Are you supporting them or their families in any way? Fifth Amendment. All of those types of things, were questions that Miss Georgi was propounding that really didn't have a whole lot to do with the murder. But in deposition and the discovery process allows her to build a defense for her client through the questions of state witnesses. So it wasn't inappropriate questions, but it was just became a lot more suspicious with the taking of the Fifth Amendment. They went so far as to appeal the lower court, the trial court, ruling that they had to answer the questions. And they set in motion an appeal, and then we had to go back to court, and the judge had to be present for the depositions. And the judge had to rule on every question before they answered the question. So instead of the deposition taking maybe 8 hours, or over the course of 2 days, maybe a course of over 16 hours, the depositions took days, over the course of maybe 5-7 days. So by that point, all the red flags were there, and just more and more skeptical and more concerned about the safety of the kids there.
From talking to the investigators on this case, we knew some of the details about these depositions. But because the sessions weren't recorded, we never got to hear them.
So this year, we requested transcripts of those conversations so we could get a sense of what sorts of questions the priests were avoiding. The documents are hundreds of pages long, and scrolling through them feels like an infinite loop of the same responses over and over again.
So what we're looking at is the document. We're looking at the document that is the transcription of the entire questioning of Father Wendt and Father Gebel.
It is, so the first one is Father Wendt's deposition from November 2002.
Yeah.
And there is about 200 pages in which he basically refuses to answer 90% of the questions.
It's really, really bizarre.
Yeah, so over here on page 54, they basically ask him why he decided to become a priest.
Yeah, he says, relying upon the advice of my counsel, due to the false allegations against me and my well-founded fear that these unjust investigations could lead to unfair charges and prosecution, I am reluctantly forced to invoke privilege and refuse to answer based on my constitutional rights guaranteed by the 1st, 5th, and 14th Amendments.
And it's crazy because, I understand that if they ask him things about the sex abuse or anything like that, but it's like really basic questions. Like I want to ask you, what is your current profession or occupation? I invoke the privilege on the grounds stated previously. Jeez. What do you do for a living? Same thing. And then the craziest one, I think, is, do you know what Holy Cross Monastery is? 5th Amendment. What is Holy Cross Academy? 5th Amendment. Where do you presently live? Same. It's hundreds of pages.
During these depositions with Father Wendt and Father Damien, prosecutor Gail Levine started to notice something interesting happening between her side and the defense team.
I've known Miss Georgi for many years. She's a fine lawyer, but usually we're on opposite sides of the table. We found ourselves going into the deposition room, and just sort of the way it was, we sat on the same side of the table, and the priests would sit on the opposite side of the table. Usually my witnesses sit on the same side. After the second day we did that, I sort of looked at Miss Georgie and I said, Edith, we're on the same side of the table this time. And we sort of had a chuckle about that. And I think at that point, during those depositions, we knew that we had a very unique situation on our hands.
As the case went on, Mike's lawyer, Edith, felt like prosecutors were sitting on more than just her side of the table, and that even Gail Levine was starting to feel the same way about Mike's allegations.
I absolutely believe he was sexually abused. And I believe that the prosecutor felt the same.
In searching for those answers, both sides would stumble across another ongoing investigation into Holy Cross. In the years before the murder of Sister Michelle, the monastery's own bishop reached out to the Vatican. The bishop was trying to find out whether Father Went and Father Damien were really priests at all. We'll go there next time on Sacred Scandal. Sacred Scandal is a production of Exile Content Studio in partnership with iHeartRadio's My Cultura podcast network. Sacred Scandal was created and produced by Melanie Bartley and me, Paula Barros. Our senior producer is Dennis Funk of Written in Air. The executive producers are Rose Reed and Nando Villa. Production, mixing, and sound design by Helena de Groot. Our production assistant is Imani Leonard. The show is fact-checked by Kimberly Winston. Original music and final audio mixing comes from Patrick Hart. And special thanks on this episode to Ariel Stevenson, Corey Chakowski, and Travis Roig. If you'd like to reach out, email us at hello@sacredscandalpodcast.com, and you can follow us on Instagram at Sacred Scandal.